Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this state level webinar on Dream, Mystery, and Nonsense, the wondrous world of popular literature, being held today, the 28th of September 2021. This webinar is being organized by the Department of English, Bhangur Mahavidyalaya, in collaboration with the IQAC Bhangur Mahavidyalaya. This is a part of the ongoing series of webinars that our college had been organizing since last year. And this is the second for the English department of our college. We had our first webinar last year in August, and I think many of you might have attended that webinar also. Now, for our second webinar, we have chosen the topic of popular literature. Popular literature, of course, is a very interesting combination of nonsense words, detective novels, fantasy, comics, and also it is there in the undergraduate CBCS syllabus in many universities. So it would be beneficial for our students also. So this evening, we would be listening to three eminent speakers. Uh, our first speaker would be Professor Debanjana Naik from Presidency University. She would be speaking on Tintin in Tibet. She would be followed by Professor Abhilash Dey from Memory College. He would be speaking on two texts, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd and Tintin in Tibet. And our last speaker would be Professor Dr. Madhumita Mujumdar, who would be talking on Shukumar Rai's Abul Tabul. We are really delighted and honored to have them with us this evening. Welcome, everyone. And before we begin the proceedings, I'd like to invite our respected principal, sir, Dr. V. Vikram Roy, to deliver his welcome address. Dr. V. Vikram Roy.
Thank you, Tathagato. Good evening, everybody. On behalf of IQAC, Bhangur Mahavidyalaya, and English Department of Bhangur Mahavidyalaya, I welcome the organizers, the speakers, and the students and other participants from all over the state, since this is a state level webinar. I'm specially indebted and thankful to Dr. Tathagato Das, who has actually conceived the idea of this webinar, especially for the benefit of our students. Uh, I don't know whether the phrase artistic, high, or elite literature is a proper antithesis to popular literature. When Shakespeare was alive during his time, he has been a very popular writer. We all know. And after undergoing so hundreds and thousands of brainstorming sessions on Shakespeare, there is no doubt now that Shakespeare is one of the very best elite and composers of high literature. And he cannot simply be bracketed with popular writers like James Headley Chase. On the other hand, if we talk about Rabindranath, he is as globally popular as he is with the Bengalis. But there can be no gainsaying the fact that Rabindranath is also a very an artist of very high merit. Uh, so the distinction between artistic and pop literature, so to say, is very murky, is very vague, with much traffic between the two categories according to public preference and later critical evaluation. Generally speaking, as Dr. Tathagata Das has rightly pointed out, the genres of romance, detective stories, science fictions, and graphic literature come under the purview of popular literature because of their overt reliance on entertainment. But then again, when Bob Dylan, one of the most popular global artists who writes his songs based on folk lingo, gets the Nobel Prize for Literature, one thing gets heavily pronounced, and that is popular literature, uh, even being popular, can touch the highest point of art. And it cannot be wished away merely as an entertaining, ephemeral piece of art. They, the popular literature, also had, in the words of Dylan, quote, principles, sensibilities, and an informed view of the world, unquote. Our distinguished speakers shall dwell on exactly this theme, how a piece of popular literature transcends the temporality, its topicality and ephemerality, how today's pop becomes tomorrow's classic. They shall try to search what amount of sense and sensibility is there in the nonsense, where is the order in the murder, and what is cosmic in the comic. I welcome all our speakers. I welcome Professor Debanjo Nagain from Presidency University. I welcome our own Dr. Madhumita Mojumdar from Diamond Harbour University and Professor Abhilash De, who I'm sure is going to entertain and inform all of us. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your insightful introduction. Uh, we will begin with Professor Debanjana Nayak, since Professor Abhilash Dev was having some kind of a problem. Uh, and I'd take this opportunity to introduce her to you. Uh, Professor Debanjana Nayak is an assistant professor in the Department of English at Presidency University. Research focuses on webcomics, graphic novels, digital storytelling, cyberfeminism, and post-colonial media theory. Her articles have been published in Feminist Encounters, a journal of critical studies in culture and politics, Journal of Graphic Novels and Comics, and several other international and national academic journals. She has recently published a chapter in Film, Media, and Representation in Post-Colonial South Asia, which was published through Routledge this year only. This evening, the title of her paper is A Red Vision in the Land of Whites, Geopolitics and Spiritualism in Tintin in Tibet. So, with these few words of introduction, I welcome you, ma'am. Uh, you can start your presentation now.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yes, I will be speaking on Tintin, but I don't know. Can I share the book, or is it possible in this medium?
Of course, you can. Of course, I
Uh,
think you will be able to see the share option towards the lower part of your screen. Can you
yes,
see?
I think it is. Yeah. Just- Okay. Just let me begin. I'll share if I need to. I just wanted to know if I can share. I will share it later, the book. But first, let me start by saying thank you. Thank you for like making a part of this panel on popular culture. Now, as I was hearing like I was listening to Dr. Roy as he was talking about Bob Dylan, and really how popular culture is no longer viewed in the same way that it used to be viewed a few years back as well. So, and I am a researcher of graphic novels, comics, web comics, and I feel that particularly it is very important to understand where does this particular medium of storytelling lie in the whole corpus of popular literature, or whether it is literature at all or not, or say the question that why should we read something like Tintin or the other comic books or graphic novels. Are they serious enough? Should we read them? So these are the questions that students of popular culture, students of literature, as well as researchers, they often face. And today I want to talk about Tintin, and I want to show the whole comic series in a very serious light, actually. And as we all know that we have, as Bengali kids, and we have grown up with Tintin. Tintin is like just not one textbook. It is just not one comic book. It is like one whole emotion. So, and we have many of us, at least I had read Tintin initially in Bengali, and then I got hold of the English version. And later, much later, I actually could see the original versions of Tintin, which is in French. So this whole journey of me as a Tintin fan, as a just a reader who picked up a book, to being a fan, to being a researcher, is also how the whole journey of comic book has made in the world of literature. So right now, I think comics and especially graphic novels have become a very important factor in literature. So Tintin, as we all know that we have grown up with, is this young boy reporter, right? So who goes out and ventures out to all these distant lands, and and he wants to do a reportage. He wants to cover certain stories of these lands. But what happens is he just does not cover these stories. He just does not make a kind of a journalistic venture. This is not just journalism. There is much more to it. There is also espionage. He's also like a spy. He also traverses through several dangerous paths, and mixes with several very deadly groups and the mafias, the goons. And here in all this, we find Tintin to come up as this really bright, intelligent reporter who is not here to just bring you the truth, but also give you a view of the world, right? And going back at the roots of Tintin, definitely as comics readers, we or initially in the childhood, we did not know that Tintin is actually it was written by a cartoonist. It was created by a cartoonist named AJ in Belgium. His actual name is George Remy, and this Belgian cartoonist started doing this cartoons, and it was not really with the idea of proliferation throughout the world, but his own Catholic upbringing and his own Boy Scout ideals were getting reflected in his initial venture of doing this kind of comic books. Now, there he created throughout his life 24 what we call in French comics bande dessinée. So 24 comic books or albums, right? Comic albums, which are about this boy reporter and who travels to different places. So it starts with Tintin in the land of Soviets, then Tintin in the Congo, Tintin in America, the Blue Lotus, the Black Island, some places like Picaros. So something that are imaginary, something which are actual geographical places. Asia has created every narrative story out of his own readings of these places, out of his own imagination. The interesting part is he never traveled to these places. So this particular book, Tintin in Tibet, in order to read this book, we had to go back to this background, that how did the creator think of such an idea? And so Tintin in Tibet, how does it stand out in amidst this 24 books? So it shows a transition in the life of the creator, in the writing style, in the creative style of the of her AJ. So it shows a transition, it shows a transformation, a change that occurred throughout all these years. So it started off in 1929, and this particular comic series, it came out in series. So this particular issue, Tintin in Tibet, came out in from 1958 to 59, a very tumultuous time, really, in the country of Tibet. So this is another factor. So that's why I have named this particular talk geopolitics, because Tintin is not just about entertainment. It is not just about reportage and espionage. It is also very much about politics. Asia was very much riding on topicality. Topicality was very important for him. So whatever was happening around the world, although he never traveled himself, he had accumulated so many newspaper reports, so many books, so many. He had done this in-depth research on these lands, that he knew exactly what is happening in Tibet. And that is why he that is why this positing of this particular story in the land of Tibet. First of all, that. Secondly, it also coincides with his own psychological problems at that point of time. At this point of time, the creator himself was facing certain dilemmas, certain issues in his own life, with his married life and his own relationship with Tintin, the creation of Tintin. It was imposing so much pressure on him that it was impossible for him to go on creating this particular issue. Right. So all this, both personal and the whole uh, global issue was there. There was this. It coincides with the two, the geopolitics as well the spiritual journey that Asia himself was undertaking at that point of time. So these are important, and in a way, I just now want to share with you the book. Just a second. Just, yeah. Okay, I think I'm having a little difficulty in sharing. So just, I am sure you all have the book. So I'll just keep on explaining what is there. So if you see the very cover of the book, it's covered with snow. There is such a overbearing color of whiteness. And this whiteness, you will find it throughout the book, especially in the mountains of Tibet, of Nepal, where and this journey that Tintin is making is through these mountains, where he is losing tracks, he is losing his friends, and he is facing certain dangers. But ultimately, he is being saved by this Buddhist monastery. Right. So this kind of overbearing, this kind of overwhelming sense of whiteness, not just white as a color, but also if you read the book, you will find there is a sense of whiteness. There is a sense of this kind of barrenness that is there, and this barren terrain is has been characterized by this white thing. And I'll just share with you one dream of his. And AJ, and I'm taking this from his this Tintin expert named Michael Farr, from his Michael Farr and Harry Thompson. I'll be citing them a lot. So this is from Harry Thompson, actually. So Harry Thompson is talking about AJ's one dream, where he sees himself alone at home, the world covered in snow, with little children playing outside. He goes out to make snowballs to throw at the children, and they disappear. At once, his responsibilities feel lifted. Then he notices a dark patch, a rock in the snow. He approaches it and finds a tunnel which he enters. At first, the going is easy, but gradually, as he gets further along the tunnel, the ground begins to slope upwards, more and more steeply. Large rocks begin to block the way. He has to heave these obstacles to one side to continue. The incline gets steeper and steeper, the passage narrower. The obstacles more difficult, the going harder. Eventually, he finds himself climbing an iron ladder up a narrow vertical chimney through the rock. At last, there is light above him, the light of a blinding white sky and a snowy landscape. As he tries to climb out of the crevasse, However, he finds that the rungs of the ladder have bent over to form iron bars, blocking his way and sealing him in. The bars holding him prisoner have taken the shape of a church window. So I have read out this particular. There are many dreams. There are many documentations of, especially Michael Farr writes about these dreams, and his biographers often talk about the dreams that Asia had witnessed during this period of time. So more than, if you look at the text of debate, you will find the exact same thing. He reflects this psychological trauma that he has, this psychological problem that he is experiencing, and that he can understand through his dreams in this particular comic book. You find the same snowy landscape, the same kind of journey that Tintin is undertaking, that he is going into a tunnel and then he cannot find the source of light, he cannot find a way out, and how children are disappearing. There is so much burden on the shoulders of both the creator of Tintin and Tintin himself. So this particular comic book stands out because it reflects Asia's own psychological issues, psychological problem. And see, at the end of the dream, it says that the bars holding him prisoner have taken the shape of a church window. So, as I had told you at the beginning of my talk, that the creator of Tintin, George Remy, had from his childhood, he was a very he had a Catholic upbringing, but and you can reflect that, you can see that reflection in Tintin in the land of Soviets or Tintin in Congo. You see a very conservative view towards the world, and Tintin in America. But when you go towards the later issues like the Blue Lotus, or where we actually find the first this character Shang for the first time, and now in Tintin in Tibet. So all these issues show us that slowly Remy or Age is going away from this whiteness. This is symbolic of whiteness, the Catholicism, this whiteness of Catholicism. He's going away from that and going towards the spirituality of the East, the mysticism of Tibet, of Buddhism, and this light that he finds at the end of the tunnel in his dream as well. That kind of light is what he finds in the mysticism uh, of of the Buddhist monastery in Tintin. So, in a way, Tintin in this particular issue is a reflection of Age himself, how he is going through the situation. And then we come to the second thing, which is he sees the creator sees a psychoanalyst, and the psychoanalyst advises him not to continue with his work on Tintin. And he says that if I were you, I would have dropped this whole project and I would have gone for the peace of my mind. But Asia did not hear him out. He there was this fight that he had, and as I was telling you, there is also a Boy Scout ideal that ran through the veins of Asia, that he has to keep his word to his friend. He has to smile through all the problems. That is kind of the zeal of the Boy Scout, and that is exactly what Asia does with Tintin. That he sticks to it, and even after being advised not to continue with this project for his own mental health, he goes on creating Tintin, and in fact he finds peace, he finds reconciliation, he finds spirituality, a sense of friendship through this creation of Tintin in Tibet. And that you find in the book as well. Tintin also, the story begins with a dream of death, a tragic event, a heart-rending event, that he loses a friend and he sees that in a dream. And although the news reports Captain Haddock and several other characters like Professor Calculus as well, so everyone dissuades him from going to Tibet to find his friend, Tintin somehow is so convinced that no, my friend is alive and I have to find him. So this search for this long lost friend is just not to search for Chang, a search for Chang, or a search for just one friendship, but also the search for spirituality that Heije had found uh, in the East, in the spiritual East. And another important factor in this whole point of geopolitics, and on the other hand, spiritualism, is these several forms of friendships that we see between Tintin and Snowy, a human and non-human, an animal. Shang and Yeti, a human and a non-human, and considered to be abominable and very dangerous. But ultimately, if you see that he is the one who saved Shang, he is the one who took care of Shang. So this whole kind of different levels of friendship that Tintin shares with Captain Haddock, or the lessons of friendship that the Sherpa learns from Tintin. So all these definitions of friendship, all these definitions of a kind of psychological resort, an emotional resort, is found in this particular story. So and and alongside that, here I'll say that the figure of Dalai Lama also worked really well here, because you remember 1959 is the year when Dalai Lama escaped from Tibet, and these were the years 1950s, were the years when Tibet was facing this occupation by China and this communism. And later, with the breaking of Soviet Union and the fall of communism in Europe, it became very for someone like Asia, it became very much like a kind of clasp of evilness, and he wanted to look at the East from a different perspective, the perspective which will not make him align Tibet with communism, but with something peaceful, something a kind of reconciliation, a kind of friendship. And on the other hand, it also deviates from the very stereotypic depiction of Tibet in other representations that we have in the West. And so Tibet is looked upon as this kind of peaceful land in this for Asia. And I just want to quote Zizek here, who says on his book On Belief, in On Belief, he says, what characterizes the European civilization is its X-centered character, the notion that the ultimate pillar of wisdom, the secret agalma, the spiritual treasure, the lost object, cause of desire, which we in the West long ago betrayed, could be recuperated out there in the forbidden exotic place. So, just I want to come to the end of my talk here, that this is how Asia was also looking at Tibet. That something that the West long has lost, and there is no hope here, and Catholicism cannot give him anymore that kind of peace, that kind of assurance, that he seeks to find in Tibet. And on the one hand, he is aware of its tumultuous times that Tibet is going through. On the other hand, he can relate to the land, and he is somewhere relating and establishing his friendship with Tintin, with this reportage, with this kind of global reportage. He is establishing all that by his narrative on Tibet and showing Tibet in a different light. Not really looking at it as the Orient, as the exotic other, but something which is definitely, it aligns with some parts of it aligns with the Orient and the exotic other, but it also gives him a kind of peace, the peace that he could not find in Catholicism, that he could not find in his own life personally, as well as through his religious sentiments. So this is how we can look at Tintin in Tibet, and we can look at how geopolitics and spiritualism can work, can be studied through this particular book. So, so here I'll end my talk. But there is much to discuss. Definitely, this is something I have just given a hint of, that how we can look at this particular book, how serious issues have been dealt with: psychological, geopolitics, spirituality, and several others. So, thank you so much. I hope someday I'll get some more time to do tell you all about the rest of it. But this is something that I want to initiate. So I'll just see it as an initiation. Thank you. I think I'll just end my talk here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your insightful and really entertaining talk, Professor Devanjana Nayak. Actually, the time is really a constraint for us. It would have been better if we could have been allotted a little more time. At least 45 minutes is needed. to really analyze texts like Tintin in Tibet, and you did a good job. Though, of course, you could not share the screen. That's a pity, really. But still, and I guess that all of us met Tintin through our in our childhood days through Anandamala. I think that was the children's magazine that really gave us our first glimpse of Tintin and that beloved little dogs, knowing Kuttus to be exact in Bengali. So that was really a wonderful talk, and you touched upon so many different aspects in the text with politics, spirituality, and all those things that Urge was really concerned with. So I think, is there any question, Devdut? Can you see anyone has asked any question? So we can begin the
No,
question.
no, not so far. And I have also, let me see the WhatsApp chat.
If there is,
No, I don't think so. They have, I think, got enriched by Professor Nayak's talk, and they are
that's
not asking any question.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Okay, Debanjana, Professor Debanjana Nayak, we thank you. Really, that was wonderful. I think we can now, please stay with us, and we will then move on to the next speaker, Professor Abhilash De. So, Professor Abhilash De will be introduced by by my colleague, Professor Devdut Mukherjee. So, Devdut, if you can please introduce Professor De.
Yes. Thank you, sir, for that opportunity for introducing Professor Day. And also, I must extend my thanks to the previous speaker, Professor Nayak. Now, I, Devdut Mukherjee, on behalf of the Department of English and IQAC, Bhagor Mahavidyalaya, to welcome Professor Day and all our esteemed speakers and participants to the one-day state-level webinar on popular literature, the topic being Dream, Mystery and Nonsense, the Wondrous World of Popular Literature. Now, I am to introduce a very popular person, Mr. Obilas De, Professor Obilas De. Professor Obilas De has been a recipient of National Scholarship on Puppetry from CCRT, Ministry of Culture, in his teens. And they graduated from the Royal Campus of Bardwan Raj College, top of his honors class in 2010, and was awarded his University Gold Medal from the University of Bardwan in 2012. Following his MPhil on the interface of urban sexuality in the graphic novels of Sarnath Banerjee in 2014-15, he was offered guest lectureship positions at Bardwan Raj College at the UG level, at Bardwan Xavier's College, again at the UG level, and at Qazi Nazrul University at the postgraduate level. They is still a visiting faculty of film studies at the PG department of Bardwan MUC Women's College. In September 2017, they joined as assistant professor at the Department of English Memory College, and he had been pursuing his PhD on Indian graphic narratives at the University of Bardwan since 2018. Professor Dey has presented papers in various online and offline seminars across the state and has ever since published more than 20 articles in books and online academic journals. One may find Professor Dey's YouTube channel, Abhilash Talkies. He's very popular YouTube channel, I must say, on Tintin and on poetry. And he also publishes an online Bengali poetry magazine named Horonno. So here, I welcome Professor Dey to this webinar, and the platform is to you, sir. Please share your thoughts with the participants. Thank you.
Thank you, Devdut Mukherjee. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. And I would like to share the screen first. And that's how I would like to begin. I would like to share the screen. Let me see if I could share the screen first, because I'm going to talk about the illustrations. Okay. Is my screen visible?
No, it's
Uh,
not.
not as yet. Not as
Not
yet.
visible yet.
Yes.
Can anyone see whether I'm sharing anything, or
No,
if it's
no, no, not as yet.
still not to be seen? Okay. Yeah, I'm getting a share option now.
Yes, even the participants are responding. Not yet. No.
Right. Now, is it visible now? I think it is.
Just give me some time. No, it's not visible to me. Yes, I think it is visible. Yes, it is visible. Yes, yes, it
Right.
is visible.
Right.
It's okay
The
now.
PowerPoint. Yeah, the
Yes.
PowerPoint. So this is how I'm going to begin. Right. I'm going to talk about the art of popular literature. Right. I'm going to try. I'm going to try and contextualize the illustrations of Lewis Carroll and the book covers of Christie, obviously. Now, see, what is the use of a book? Asked Alice in the opening scene to Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, and without pictures or conversation. So that is the crux of my talk. That is going to be the crux of my talk. What is the use of a book without pictures or conversations? So that is a question. And now I would like to give you a very brief outline of how I'm going to go about all these topics. First, we're going to talk about the 1860s, how Lewis Carroll and his 37 illustrations made their way into children's literature and popular literature. What is an illustration? Then we're going to try and define culture a bit. What is high culture? What is low culture? Then what is popular culture? What is your pop literature as you know it, as we know it? Then came the 1920s and 1930s. We are going to talk about Agatha Christie. Why detective fiction, right? Ratiocination and everything associated to it. The difference between mystery, thriller, suspense, right? And then we're going to jump in onto the book covers by Tom Adams, the Christie book covers by Tom Adams. And I'm going to conclude by saying that how and why book covers they must matter. So now, it was July 4th, 1862. English mathematician, logician Charles Dodson, you know him as Lewis Carroll. He boarded a small boat with a few friends. Among them was a little girl named Elise Liddell. And just to entertain her and her sister, as they floated down the river between Oxford and Glasgow, Dodson fancied a whimsical story. Alice in Wonderland went on to become one of the most beloved children's books of all times. In addition to his clerical and mathematical pursuit, Carroll was as much a visual artist as a storyteller. In 1899, there was enough unpublished material for his nephew Stuart Carroll Collingwood to publish a Lewis Carroll picture book. You could check it out. Lewis Carroll picture book. It's a collection of very lesser known, very rare texts with illustrated margins. And my point of interest is there, the illustrated margins actually. So in the 150 years since John Tenniel, who was the original illustrator for Lewis Carroll's works, and the century since Arthur Rackham and his pioneering reimagining of Lewis Carroll's work, the Carroll classic has covered everything from a pop-up book adaptation to a witty cookbook to a quantum physics allegory and whatnot, and hundreds of artists around the world have imagined it, reimagined it, and whatnot. John Tenniel's famous illustrations for both the first edition of Wonderland and its sequel, to the Looking Glass, have become very integral to how we experience a story in both books and in the films. Tenniel, however, was not the first to illustrate the tale. That honor belongs to Lewis Carroll himself. See, this is what Lewis Carroll did. Carroll's illustrations are slightly more reserved and less caricature than John Tenniel's efforts, familiar to us today. I mean, we have seen John Tenniel's works mostly. In a vertical sketch, you can see that stretches across the manuscript's right margin, left margin here, spanning part of the indelible mushroom scene. Alice's immense length of neck assumes the form of a fuzzy tree trunk, with the almost pre-Raphaelite face, right? Then, using the caricature technique of comic comparison, Carroll positions Alice next to objects and creatures that are smaller that are larger, just to make her appear in turn taller or littler. For example, in chapter 1, in a marginal inset illustration, you can see that Carol draws Alice lying on the ground, leaning on her elbow to gaze directly at the white rabbit, right, who is standing next to her and appearing to be half her size. Size is going to matter. Size is going to matter, right? And now, on the left, you have Alice's Carol, as Carol draws her in mushroom scene, and on the right, Carol's portrait of Alice Liddell. This is from the final page, by the way. On the final page, Carol struck a small photographic portrait of Alice Liddell, the family friend for whom he wrote and drew the story. Underneath the photograph is his attempt at a drawn portrait. I've just shown you the portrait, and he was not happy with the portrait, right? And it's just his attempt that with which he seems to have been displeased enough to cover the drawing with the photograph of Alice Liddell, actually, right? These examples indicate how Carol uses the text to function as physical object. A wall, a ceiling, a ruler to create the illusion of shrinking, the illusion of growing. But he also memorably shapes the text into an emblematic form, the mouse's tail. This mouse's tail is very, very famous, by the way. You've all seen this. Also in Hojoborolo, right? So the mouse's tail is one of Carol's many inventive examples of wordplay. A tail is shaped like a tail. Okay. All 37 of Carol's manuscript illustrations can be bittersweet associations. On one hand, it's a joy that they have survived. It was treasured by Alice Liddell until she was forced to auction the text in 1928 to pay for her husband's death duties. Thankfully, it was eventually purchased after passing through the possession of several intermediary owners by American benefactors who donated the manuscript to the British Library as a symbol of post-war relationship between the nations and everything. As the story progresses, Alice becomes enormous after drinking from a bottle marked "Drink Me." Memorably, she nearly outgrows the White Rabbit's house. To depict her immense size in second chapter, Carol creates a simple rectangular box, you can see it, rectangular box, a picture frame to designate the White Rabbit's dwelling. Alice fills the entire frame, which is too small for her. Now let's come to Tenniel. Now Tenniel is very important and at the same time very popular, and Tenniel draws a white rabbit in its natural habitat. See, it's a meadow, right? And Tenniel authenticates the white rabbit's human and animal traits, both essential to the social caricature of a Victorian gentleman rabbit living in an industrialized age, run by clocks, run by schedules, especially with the coming of the railway. That is something that I want to stress. He constantly frets about being late, Mr. Rabbit, and Tenniel adds just enough genteel clothing to indicate the white rabbit. And it's pretty believable, I think, for a gentleman. The white rabbit wears a waistcoat but no trousers. The showing of the creature's rabbit haunches and fluffy tail, but he also carries a pocket watch, a mark of respectability, gentility, right? That pocket watch. And the rabbit gentleman in his checked coat looks forceful enough to command Alice to fetch his gloves and fan. We know that how he commands Alice and how he frets about time. We know this. Now tell me, what is an illustration? Illustration is a picture illustrating a book, newspaper, right? And this is right from the dictionary or from Google. Even if you Google illustration meaning, you get this. The action or act of illustrating something, right? Now, what is important to me is this. It comes from the origin. It owes its origin to the late Middle English, from illumination. Now, what do you know about illumination? This is a spiritual awakening. It's about intellectual enlightenment, right? Illumination. It's also from Old French, and it's also a Latin word at the same time. Illustrate, right? And it's also a verb. Now, the illustrations of medieval codices, those were known as illuminations. The illumination that we just talked about. I mean, it came from a word that actually had its roots in awakening and everything. So that is where we are going to owe the origin of illustration. So illuminations, and they were individually hand-drawn, individually hand-painted. Then came printing press, and with the invention of it, in the 15th century, of course, books became more widely distributed, often illustrated with woodcut paintings, right? Now, some of the earliest illustrations come from, I would say, Egypt, right? Kemet, and often as hieroglyph. Obviously, we are talking about 1294, 12303. And in 1600s, in that decade, Japan saw the origination of ukiyo-e, an influential illustration style characterized by expressive line, vivid color, subtle tones, resulting from the ink-brushed wood block printing technique. We just talked about the woodcuts. The British humorous magazine Punch, it was built on the success of Krishan's comic almanac and employed many well-regarded illustrators of that time. And historically, Punch was most influential in the 1840s and in the 1850s. We are already talking about 1865, right? Lewis Carroll's masterpiece. The magazine was the first to use the term cartoon to describe a humorous illustration, and its widespread use that led to John Leech being known as the world's first cartoonist. Now, we're going to come back to the basics. What is culture? See, the arts and other manifestation of human intellectual achievement, which is regarded collectively. That is what culture is, right? It's defined understanding or appreciation of culture. It's about the ideas, the custom, the social behavior of a particular people or society, and whatever I'm showing you, it is geared towards a undergraduate class, obviously, and it's very important that culture is about the attitudes and behavior or the characteristic of a particular social group. And now, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that culture, as we know it, as I know it, as you know it, it didn't exist, right? There was this word called agriculture. Culture came from agriculture. So, I mean, in Middle English, cultivated land, cultivated piece of land, that was something, right? There was a noun in French, culture, right? And it came directly from Latin cultura, which is growing, which is about cultivation, obviously. So when we see that, it is about tending, it is about cultivating, it is actually a very it is about a very agro-literate society from where this word is coming out. So when we say that ki tumi chorcha karo, see, this is about the chorcha, this is about tending, this is about cultivating yourself, and it is about the cultivation of mind. I mean, mon ke korton kora, chorcha kora. So that is what Shilpo is, right? So it is about tending your faculties. It is about cultivating manners, and all these things, all these annotations that I'm talking about, all these meanings that is coming out, the culture that we know that came about in the early 19th century. So culture, this word, it's pretty new. Okay. Now let's come down to high culture and low culture. So high culture most commonly refers to the set of cultural products, mainly in the arts, held in the highest esteem by culture. Like, you know about Wasteland, T.S. Eliot. You also know about David, the sculpture David. You also know about the sculpture Pieta. You know about Sistine Chapel, right? The Vatican Red Rooms, painted by Raphael Santi. So, and in contrast, low culture refers to that of the less well-educated or the masses. You know what masses is? Gono, right? Gono, what we call. Encompassing such things as gossip magazines, reality television, popular music, YOLO journalism even, escapist fiction, camp, right? So from there, we're going to gradually come down to what popular culture is. We're going to gradually come down to it. In order to understand popular culture, we have to, distinguish between what has been traditionally referred to as high and low culture. Traditionally, mind you, traditionally, right? It doesn't happen these days. After the advent of postmodernism, the lines have blurred, obviously, which is why we are talking about illustrations, which is why we are talking about comics and graphic novels. And in such an academic vein, academic fashion, we're talking about all these things. A very postmodernist approach to popular culture that might argue that there is no longer a clear distinction between high and popular culture. There is this blurring of the boundaries, right, between high culture, between low culture. And one of the main complaints made by traditional intellectuals is that, like T.S. Eliot, who is a modernist ascetic, shonnashi, that's what T.S. Eliot is. He's a hierophant. He's a hierophant of high culture, of upholding high culture, because he didn't like Philistines, those who doesn't read books, those who don't watch a film, those who don't know how to appreciate a painting or a sculpture. Those are Philistines, right? So T.S. Eliot was pretty much reserved about all this, about low culture, obviously. Now, popular literature, now we come down to popular literature, and that is what we are actually doing, and actually we are talking about. That popular literature is literature that is enjoyed by this large mass of people. A good example would be obviously your Harry Potter series, right? And in Bengali, Panta Goenda, why not? In India, one might associate popular literature with the likes of Chetan Bhagat, Preeti Shenoy, Mr. Party, and we would also hesitate to classify their work as literature too at the same time. But then that is also a subjective view. It cannot be denied that these writers enjoy large popular appeal. Often people tend to associate popular literature with inferior literary value. However, that might not always be the case, because Shakespeare and Charles Dickens, they were quite popular at that time, right? Especially after the advent of postmodernism. That is what I'm saying. Now, since we are gradually transitioning from 1865 to 1920s, 30s, and 40s, when Agatha Christie is writing, right? So let's talk about what is a mystery, a thriller, and a suspense. So mystery is about the puzzle, right? Thriller is the push and pull between the protagonist and the villain. Although after Avengers and after Thanos, you know that there is nothing called a villain, right? It's anti-hero. So there are no villains. It's anti-hero. The order has been a little bit subverted, actually. So suspense is about tension and what may happen, what might happen. It can be presented in any genre, by the way. Suspense can be presented in any genre. And in the end, nothing is formulaic, that this is a mystery, this is a hard thriller, and this is a hard suspense. So nothing is formulaic. It's ultimately about crafting a compelling story, a page turner, as you know it, right? With interesting characters, fantastic plot. And I may select a book because not because of a genre level, but I keep reading if I'm pulled into the story. It's as simple as that. Now, why detective fiction? Auden thought that a fundamental appeal was pretty religious. At least in Protestant countries, you see, Auden is writing that the solution of the crime that vicariously is relieving our guilt, and it's restoring us to innocence, right? Some used to say that this restoration of innocence, the villain is caught, right? That solace is pretty political, and there is geopolitics associated to it. But then let's not go there. But the thing is, during the interwar years, right, which was marked by terrible political upheaval, right? It goes without saying. The detective story may have reassured people that disruptive forces lay not in the social order, but in just one bad person. You find that one bad person, and that's it. You remove that one bad villain, and then order will be, levied. I mean, status quo will be fine then, right? So, in a probing history of detective story by John Welty, he says that, see, this genre is still doing that duty, right? I mean, the loss and the recovery, it's pretty, literary. Readers of the 1920s and onwards, they were assaulted by modernism. And then after 1945, we have our postmodernism, right? And we are kind of grateful to find in detective literature sentences with subjects and predicates, stories with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Which is why Borges said that after you read a detective novel, right, other fiction, they seem pretty shapeless to you. And at the bottom, all these arguments are the same. I mean, the appeal of the detective story is still about the restoration of order, right? We have to restore the order. So it was invented by Edgar Allan Poe. You probably know this detective story, but he pretty soon lost interest. I mean, only 4 of them, right? Other writers picked up where he left off, but the first idiot practitioner of the genre, who is still important to us today, is Arthur Conan Doyle, right? By the time Christie is writing, at least 2 conventions had been established, right? Now, first was the detective's eccentricity, right? And then the second rule was the central role of ratiocination. So a detective, when he's walking, he shows almost no emotion. You have seen this, even in Feluda. You have seen it, even in Feluda. He shows no emotion, right? What he shows and what constitutes the main pleasure of the story is inductive reasoning. So that is what ratiocination actually is about, right? So then let me go on to the next one. Christie, who began publishing detective fiction 30 years later after Conan Doyle, generally followed these rules. I mean, I just talked about just 2 rules, and the third one would be, restoration of order. So keep that in mind, please. So she elaborated on them. She created scenario, right? Small place, interrogation, revelation, gathering everyone at the end of the story. That is very, interesting to me. Always has been very interesting to me. And used it fairly consistently in 66 detective novels published between 1920 and 1976. Okay. All right. For today's reader, one pleasure of Christie's books is a portrait of the times. I mean, the period between the two World War and above all the changes that took place after the Second War. Our people are upper middle class, sometimes upper class. They gaze with astonished disgust at housing development and supermarkets, right? I'm having a little bit of issues actually. Sorry about that. Okay, now let's come down to the cover artist, Tom Adams. So Tom Adams is one of the most familiar Agatha Christie artists in the world. He designed nearly all of the UK and European paperback covers for Fontana Press. And let's actually delve into all this. This is a cover for A Murder is Announced. The cover features an early scene from the book. You can see the lights go out. It's a dinner party. The door swings open. A man is revealed, right? There's a blinding torch and he demands, stick him up. And the woman in pink has erroneously been identified as Miss Marple. In fact, she does not join the story, not until later. This is a book, and then there were none. This is a book that I had first read, the first Agatha Christie book that I had read. The twisted texture, you have to see the twisted texture, right? From the rope and the seaweed. It helps to create the atmosphere of, that creepy island mystery. Now we have Crooked House. You can see the woman's head in front of the multi-gabled house, right? And the cover is based on Mary Dunning, Tom's wife at that time. I mean, Tom Adams' wife, the illustrator's, the cover artist's wife at that time, who is reading from Arthur Rackham's painting called Marjorie and Margaret. So there is this another reference to Marjorie and Margaret, right? Arthur Rackham's. And we have heard about Arthur Rackham's, right? With Tenniel, we had heard about Arthur Rackham. Now come to Easy to Kill. This rooster in front of the forefront here, right? In the forefront, which appears in both the English and American covers, is suggestive of the black magic mentioned in the book. And it's one of the several red herrings Tom Adams occasionally and intentionally includes in his cover designs. Endless Night. This cover features the house at Gypsy's Acre and a sinister woman who wants an ancient curse, along with the several elements from William Blake's poem, Auguries of Innocence. So another reference, Auguries of Innocence, comes here. Murder in the Calais Coach. Why am I showing you this? See, the UK title of the book was Murder on the Orient Express. The US title was changed for this famous mystery to avoid confusion with 1932's Graham Greene's novel Stamboul Train, right? Which is why in the United States, we could not, we could not, do this. I mean, Stamboul Train was written by Graham Greene. And then again, if you are going to publish something called Murder on the Orient Express, right? So that's not right for the United States readers, which is why Murder in the Calais Coach, this became the American one. And the UK title was Murder on the Orient Express. You might have seen the film by Kenneth Branagh. Okay, Nemesis. Now, the design for Nemesis is quite different from the others that I was showing you. This was one of the pocket books, and it wanted a primarily text-based cover. The collapsing of the greenhouse, the camellias, right? Next one is Remembered Death. Now, again, the UK title was Sparkling Cyanide. And to me, this is important. The Springs of Rosemary Bush. Rosemary Barton, that being the name of the murder victim in the story, we can see Rosemary Bush here, right? The obscuring branches in the foreground, which is going to induce to you the sense of suspense, the sense of thriller, the mystery of the blue train. This is the only Christie cover by Tom Adams that portrays the dark figure on the back cover next to the blue train. That is intended to be Hercule Poirot. So, the front court has a broad walk in the French Riviera, along with a handful of rubies, and you can see Hercule Poirot actually just in one of the covers by Tom Adler. So that was important to me. Towards zero, the body in this cover. First of all, you can see how sprawling it is. He's using the front cover, he's using the back cover, right? Tom Adams is using whatever he has, all the resources that he has, all the visual rhetoric that he can get his hand into. The body in this cover is not immediately apparent, and it is cleverly covered by the distorting effect of the rippling water. Okay, so now why book covers matter? The popular idiom is don't judge a book by its cover. But despite how true it might be in an idealistic sense, the reality of the book industry is that the vast majority of readers do indeed use the cover of a book as a deciding factor. You do it, I do it, everyone does it. The cover is not only a billboard for the book, but in a sense, the first page of the story. Because it is here that the book can communicate a little of the style and the mood of the tale inside. A dark cover with lots of shadow can suggest a horror, while a bright white cover with clouds could suggest a motivational textbook. This is important because it speaks to the emotion of the reader, engaging them on a deeper level. A cover can also create preconceptions in a reader's mind about the characters or the setting, what it might look like, and it is debatable whether or not this is a good thing, as the cover design may not match the author or reader's ideas. So it's debatable. A book cover creates a first impression on its potential readers. Therefore, a book cover design is one of the most important aspects of marketing a book. So now these are a few books that I had gone through, obviously, and before I conclude, I have to get out of this. First. I have to stop sharing, by the way. Before I conclude, my purpose is very rudimentary. You see, one, you pay more and more attention to the visual rhetoric of any text that you read, that you go through. I myself am a comic scholar, and I want to communicate that how engaging and rewarding it is. You see, rewarding it is to read between the illustrations and trying to figure out the significance of illustrations. A picture tells 1,000 words, right? So look closer. And second, children's literature, popular literature, comics, graphic novels. These are gaining academic sustenance day by day, and more and more as we go, actually. So contribute to it, be a part of it, right? Peel the onion, right? You have another engaging and thought-provoking talk after this, I'm pretty sure. And the one before me, that was engaging to me even. And so you people stay tuned. Thank you so much for listening to my talk. I thank Tothagato sir too, Principal Dr. Roy too, for this opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Dev. You have really done a lot of justice, huge justice to your topic, that is contextualizing popular literature from Lewis Carroll to Agatha Christie. And we have some questions for you from the participants. Yes, the first question is from Ishani Ghosh. She asks, sir, what do you have to say about the absence of proper woman characters in popular detective fiction?
Oh no, actually, no. Women characters are not that absent. See, it's a huge topic actually. What she asked, it's a very intertwined and huge topic, and I need to speak a lot about this. But the thing is, you have to remember that I was talking about restoration of order, and you have to also think about this fact that this order is pretty patriarchal. Okay, most of the time it's very patriarchal, and the gaze that we still feel, right, Ishani, it's also, what is a proper woman character? You should ask things like why gender is still an issue. Pink came out, right? Pink, the film came out, and there was this huge debate that Amitabh Bachchan, who is a male advocate, he is the savior of the three girls. So everyone was debating on this fact, which is a very stupid and foolish fact that, see, a male is saving, ultimately a male is saving the three girls. So this idea of savior and that this idea of powerlessness, I mean, you have your Nitin Mashi, you have, even in Pandav Gwenda, you have female detectives, and Miss Marple is there, right? And even in when you have this the syllabus text we have on Agatha Christie, the murder of Roger Ackroyd, the women, they play a very central role, you see. And again, whether you need female detectives, that is one question. And I would like for you to read all those Bengali. Ananda Publishers had come out with three books, 3 volumes, Shekaler Goenda Golpo in Bengali. You would find a few, female characters, and this proper woman character. I have to talk a lot more about this, because this is about characterization, and gender has gone a long way. Okay, gender has gone a long way, and after books like Ministry of Utmost Happiness, I don't think we should ask questions like this, and we have to ask questions whether the transgenders are getting any way into it or not, right? So that would be this spectrum. We have to talk about the spectrum of gender, actually. Okay, I will like to
Okay.
elaborate on
Yeah.
you know
Yeah, thank you. Now there is again Mr. Apurup Chakraborty. He asks, what
Right.
is the difference between pulp and noir fiction?
Say, Opuro, if you watch Martin Scorsese's films, that is Noir. Okay, it has its darkness, it has its chiaroscuro. Okay, at the same time, it's more crime, it's more about crime. Road to Perdition, it's a graphic novel, which is a noir graphic novel. And pulp is, it's just paperback, it's mass market, it's paperback. And pulp fiction is very sensationalized at the same time, but noir fiction is pretty hard hitting. I would say it's very hard hitting. Martin Scorsese's films, Christopher Nolan is pretty noir, by the way.
Yeah. Now there is another question by Miss Tanuja Khatun. Yes.
Hi,
Sir,
Kanchan,
what say
I
yeah,
think
hi contact. Yeah, yeah.
I talked a lot about this. I delved a
Yes,
lot.
yes, yes, you had. Yes. Yeah. So Tanuja, I would request you to go through the live video. Sir has already talked about it. You will go through the recording. Now there is someone else who is asking, Sir, why the detectives men who always search motives behind the murder or mystery wear such dress, or I may say piece of clothes?
See, it's another topic for another talk. The garments, okay, the garments. But again, how Sherlock Holmes is dressing up, how Miss Marple is dressing up, or how Hercule Poirot is dressing up, it reflects the time. That time, I mean, how people would see fashion at that time, and how people envisions fashion at that time, and what would be the fashion of ratiocination. I talked about ratiocination. So, I mean, if you're a thinking man, if you're a man who is a very reasonable person, so the author tries to, keep up with that. What would a reasonable person wear? So, I think this is a topic for another talk, the garments.
I think Sir talked about images, so you can also think in that line. Like
Yeah.
Sir has talked, even Sir talked about the book covers as well as the way in which culture operates. That's a very important point that Sir pointed out. And Sir also talked about visual culture, which is nowadays a very important thing. Taken the memes and all such stuff which are coming in recently. Thank you so much. I don't think there are any more questions now. So thank you, Professor Day. It has been a pleasure listening to you, and I hope the same for all the participants. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you. Yes. Yes. Is Professor Nayak there? Professor Devanjana Nayak?
Yes, yes.
Yes, madam, I think after your speech there was a question. It was, I think, meant for you. It was from our student Alamgiruddin. He asks, what message Tintin in Tibet gives us? Is it only the spirituality of friendship?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the question, Alamgir. So, see, there are when you search for, first of all, let's get out of the this particular text and go out to every text. So, what message every text gives us? So, there is this general question that you can ask. There are two answers here. One is the creator or the author will give you one message. There will be one message that he or she will intentionally and deliberately will give you, and the second one is something that you as a student of literature or a scholar will find out, will interpret, will quote unquote read between the lines. Right. So I'll answer your question in this way, answering in these two pointers. One is yes, if I see Asia's intention of what did he convey through Tintin in Tibet. So definitely, on the one hand, he talks about the mysticism, the spirituality of Tibet. On the other, he is connecting that spirituality with the sense of friendship, right? And in a way he is also breaking away, and this is another message that the creator of Tintin wants to do, because he was so much criticized for his earlier works, that how he represented other lands, say even the land of Soviet or America, the Native Americans, or even India to some extent. So the way he had portrayed these lands, he had drawn a lot of criticism. Now he wants to look out for how he can look at the world from a non-conservative viewpoint, right? So when he is looking at Tibet, he is also showing his readers, giving his readers this message that the Orient is not always the exotic, not always mystical, but also a land where you find peace, also a land which has a greater understanding. Hmm. An example of that would be, say, and this you can read as a scholar, as a student of literature, you can understand it. Now, here you come, as I said, that read between the lines. If you see the character of Captain Haddock in this particular issue, you will find from the very beginning he is very cynical. He's very skeptic. He does not want to believe Tintin and his visions that Shang is alive. And even later, when they go to this Buddhist monastery, Captain Haddock looks as Grand Abbot, and he feels that these are quote unquote hocus pocus. These are just rubbish things. There is no sense in it. And so, this levitation and the vision of especially blessed lightning was denounced as something that is that is nonsensical. And that skepticism of Captain Haddock is something that the West holds for the East. So this is another message. The second pointer is, as a student of literature, I think you can read this in this way, that Heiji is also looking at the East uh, in a different light, breaking away from the stereotypical image of the East, of Tibet, and to understand spiritualism in a different way. Something that is beyond Christianity, beyond Catholicism, something that even the Grand Abbot says, replies to Captain Haddock, that there are certain things in Tibet that you do not probably understand, but you have to really give a better, deeper understanding of it. You have to get into the depth of it to understand this spirituality. So that kind of depth in thought is necessary. So I think it is not just the spirituality of friendship that is the message, but spirituality on a holistic sense. There are several kinds of spirituality. That is the message here. Okay, I think I could answer your question, Alamgir. Thank you.
Uh, I hope you have answered, and he will definitely let us know. Thank you, Devanjana madam, for your answer. Now I shift the platform to Professor Tathagato Das sir to carry the matter forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ubhilash De, for your really wonderful presentation. I was really following your the the presentation that the screen that you shared with a lot of interest, and I myself am very kind of an enthusiast, you can say, of detective fiction, especially. I have read almost all the Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple stories, so it was really entertaining. And uh, thank you once again for your really wonderful uh, presentation. And Professor Debanjana Nayak also, thank you for answering that question so brilliantly. Now I'll request my colleague, Professor uh, Shantanu Day, to please introduce the third speaker, Professor Dr. Mothumita Mojumdar. Shantanu, if you can please do the honors.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Now, I thank our previous speakers, Professor Nayak and Professor Day, for their enlightening presentation. Our next speaker is Professor Modhumita Mojumdar. Uh, so, she is uh, presently an associate professor and HOD, the Department of English at Diamond Harbour Women's University, West Bengal, India. She has been teaching for almost 19 years now. Her areas of interest are Victorian literature, Indian English writing, and with her major interest in Dalit literature. She also has presented over 80 papers at national and international seminars and 50 articles to her credit in reputed journals and books. She has involved in translation projects primarily from Bengali to English. Today, ma'am's topic is locating sense behind the nonsense in Shukumar Rai's Abol Tabol. So I invite Professor Modhumita Mojumdar on behalf of the English department of Bhangur Mahavidyalaya to present her ideas in this particular topic.
A very good evening to all of you. Thank you, Shantani. And it is good to be back with you all. Yes, of course, I'll try and talk some sense about the nonsense rhymes of Shukumar Rai's Abul Tabul. I begin, with a kind of a pretext to how these things were actually happening. The printing press that, and the wider literacy programs that you could say could be associated with 19th century Bengal or Bengal Renaissance in that way. And of course, with Calcutta, being the second city of the British Empire after London, had to do with this kind of changes that were actually taking place. Upendra Kishore Roy Chaudhary, of course, is a name that is associated with children's literature. And if you are talking about Upendra Kishore, one thing that needs to be remembered, that even as a publisher, as a writer, he was somebody who, through his, I would say, experiments, brought about, a difference in the publishing sensibility. And that was, the half-tone color block printing for the first time in India. Now, this I mentioned because when his son, Shukumar Ray, actually went abroad and, studied photography and printing in England, and he came back to sort of realize the kind of techniques that he had learned in England were being used here. So this is something that he mentions in his Britannica Encyclopedia, and that I would say is a pioneer moment that we can see in this 19th century. The child as a concern was also something that was coming within the national movement, because the children were the future. This is, of course, the Victorian influence. You had Rousseau's Emile and other texts being written. You have, of course, Alice in Wonderland and other, books being written during the time, which were, talking about developing the mind of the children. And of course, Thakumar Chuli, which came up in the early part of the 20th century, was also an attempt to collect this random tales of morals, tales of traditions, so that the koka or the cookie in Bengal could actually be nurtured in the right way. The other thing was, of course, the Macaulay's Minutes of Education, which was an attempt to almost, westernize the mind of people here, and of course, through their education, take us away from the heritage and culture. And therefore, this is also a kind of a reciprocal movement, I would say, where the focus on writing for children, writing about children, and writing about things that would I would say fertilize their mind was being done. Tentatively, if I'm talking about these attempts, I do have to talk about Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, who was to print the Bengali alphabets, but most importantly with illustrations. Now, illustrations would be also a very important aspect when we talk about Abul Tabul in that way. There would be Keshav Chandra Sen's weekly Shulabh Samachar, which would also talk about elementary moral education. There would be, of course, from the Tagore household, Sharna Kumari Devi's Balak. She would be the sister of Tagore, and she would be the editor of this. Later, even Tagore would go on to become the editor of this particular journal. There would be Tagore's sister-in-law, Ganoda Devi, who also would write many articles, attractive articles for children. Even, Upendra Kishore would also write science, articles, illustrate them, and write them for children. So what I'm trying to say, they were not necessarily trying to bring the children back to this tradition or heritage, slip that was occurring during the time, but also, to keep them abridged. And of course, that is why you have this, articles, small scientific articles with illustrations being printed during that time. Now, when you talk about Sukumar Ray, and you of course talk about nonsense verse, you will have Louis Carroll and Edward Lear in mind, and you will also have Shandesh, the magazine that was started by Upendra Kishore with the primary intention of, of educating and liberating children's mind in a way. Now, this would be sad that Shandesh could not be carried on for long, but then, of course, the articles of Upendra Kishore, then of Sukumar Ray, of course, would, be rich. So this is a kind of a rich collection, and of course that demands a kind of a different discussion, as one would say. Now, Sukumar Ray was born in 1887, so this time, the late 19th century, and of course growing under the influence of a genius like a father like Upendra Kishore. So, and soon after leaving college, Sukumar Ray also formed what was known as the Nonsense Club. And initially, you would know that Sukumar Ray had written two plays, which was called Thala Phala, and of course there was another play, Lakshmane Shokti Shel. But perhaps if you're talking about the sharp mind that you see in Abul Tabul, maybe this is not so, but this was like a training ground, where you talked about the peasant problem, you talked about many social problems. So the humor that that Sukumar Ray has is without malice, you could say, but yes, there are satires. Two qualities as a satirist that you need to keep in mind when we talk about Sukumar Ray is, of course, his remarkable gift as an observant, a strict observant eye, and limitless imagination. And this is where you probably come to fantasy and you come to nonsense. Now, what could be the difference? Because fantasy as an element, of course, appeals to children. So when you are, in a way, I wouldn't say that would be the basic tenet. There would be other political and social reasons that I hope I will be able to talk about, but the basic intent of, appealing to the children's mind would be an easy ground if you're using fantasy, imagination, and you're using, characters which are exaggerated. But, if we must keep in mind that in fantasy, as in nonsensical verse, where there would be animals which could fly, animals which would represent or remind you of human beings and human qualities, human society, that would be there. But the signifier and the signified in both these genres, I think, would be very different. The fantasy, the appeal on mostly a kind of a moral level. But when it comes to the nonsensical verse, since the agenda is not only to appeal to, let's say, children, but also to the adult mind, there would be provocations that we can think about. We would be reminded of, contemporary issues. And of course, by the time Abul Tabul actually gets published in 1923, so that's, if you're looking at, Indian politics, 1915, Gandhi returns, and of course, there is a pan-Indian leader. There is, of course, more importantly, what is known a kind of a combined, movement for independence. So, there are talks. The First World War had already taken place, and of course, the huge role that the then Indian army under the British regime played in that war, changed a lot of dynamics, and of course, things were becoming very, very different. But of course, there was also a very alert British government which knew that there could be provocations through, and of course, when they started to educate the Indians, they started to get them into this Western education, Western mold, hoping that these babus would be a kind of a gap between the Britishers and of course the Indian lower classes, or the non-educated in that way. They did not realize that there could be two groups within it. That one group which would be survived, which would continue to serve the British interests and do everything to please the British masters. The others, which would include Sukumar Ray, and there would be a gamut of other people educated in Western philosophy, Western thoughts, who would raise very potent questions against the Britishers and use this as it. So it is not that Sukumar Ray was completely unaware of Louis Carroll, or wasn't aware of this kind of a genre, but he perhaps adapted it. But then, am I trying to say that this kind of a humor or a laughter used as a kind of a satirical form did not exist, as one would say, prior to Sukumar Ray? That would perhaps be incorrect to say. Of course, there would be Bonki, there would be Tagore, and of course, if you would look at Bonkim's Kamala Kanto, again, the deeper irony, the impositions of the Western modernity, the kind of, reflection on what colonial modernity actually meant or brought on us in that way. So, on one hand, this colonial education was about modernity, but accepting it with subjugation. Saying that yes, we accept that they are our masters. The other was, of course, talking about autonomy. So this is of course the responses, you could say. The fact that the Babus, the adaptation of their reform and rationalism, of the British colonial sensibility is problematic, because the Babu would be somebody who would be a rationalist, but he would be an opportunist. He would be somebody, who would accept everything that seemingly seemed right within modernity. He would not be superstitious. He would break traditions. He would adapt, everything that seemed to be right in the eyes of his British masters. So that was where the problem was. Now, Bonking even talks about this cult of Babu, talks about, how they perhaps were, people who were ruining in that way the concept of culture, if there was, if I can use the word, the Bengali culture in that way, because they were a unique breed, a different breed, what they were, it's very difficult to say. Like in Sukumar Ray's poem, bhalo re bhalo, if you remember that line, shobar chaite bhalo paruti ar jholagu. So this kind of an unique combination, and they don't know. So even when we talk about a poem like Tash Goru, you will see that the rejection of food, the kind of food that the Goru actually, the cow, the westernized cow refuses to eat, is actually a reflection of his wanting to adapt to the Western life and Western culture, Western thought, even through food. So he eats a kind of a special breed of grass, so hay and corn, so nothing more. So it's like reminding you of the kind of a typical British breakfast or English breakfast, as one would say. So even Tagore, talks about the Babu's quest, this group of people, educated in the Western thought, Western ideology, in a quest for historical bringing. And therefore, they also construct a kind of, as I would say, human history. And, they have a narrative. The Babus have a narrative, but this is a narrative of some kind of an exclusion, because they somehow do not seem to integrate the Indianness, of thought in that way. The humanity that the Babu would like to belong to is the humanity whose history he constructed, and he believed this is where he belonged. So he was like a performer of the theater, and whose destiny seemed to be shaped by Western history and thought. So somewhere down the line there was, as we could realize, no pride in one's sense of belonging. So there was this question of identity. There was this question of who are these people? What are they? Absolutely being made of. That is also an important thing. In as I was talking about this concept of laughter and humor, satire existing before Ray, we can talk about Tagore's Shonar Tori also. Fundamentally, this would also remind you of Bonkim's works. This is a nonsensical story. The subject is the Babu. This is the world of a ruler of a mythical kingdom, incomprehensible dreams, illusions. But every time, when you look at it, you are reminded that these are various places in Europe. So there is an attempt to imitate that kind of a world. So, and when we talk about this what you call imagination, this fantasy being taken to this world of the animals, that is what is repeatedly going to happen in many poems of Abul Tabul. What I think becomes important there, that people have been so westernized, people have been so believing in things that that is not them. Therefore this is something that naturally spills onto the animal world, and the animal world is used as a kind of an inversion. Now this is fascinating, because again, if I'm to look at the kind of literature that was being published for children, there would be the children's Ramayana, there would be the tales of Panchatantra. So these bestial fables, which would also have a moral purpose, and when put in this nonsensical frame and this kind of narrative, I think that also was a kind of a I would say an indicator that think about them not in the way that they are being presented. So don't just go by that exaggerated version, don't go by that illustrations, but and the pictures, of Ramrurechana, of a little pod belly with a kind of a tail with two, ears, etc., would represent that typical, pod bellied, lazy Bengali, and this kind of a questioning of the chivalric notions, that seemingly seem to be slowly eroding out of this Bengali psyche in that way. So the depressed, the depravity being portrait to animals, that is also a way of maintaining a kind of a distance between the world of reality and the world of fiction, because such direct criticism can sometimes be very, very pungent, and that might not be liked, and people will probably not get the message. So the distance is something which allows people to get the kind of message that the poet or the writer was trying to actually say. If you look at poems like Hukumuko Hangla, or if you look at the conventionality, the rationality, which was set during the Raj, how such characters, are actually talking about. Hukumuko actually has, two tails which go in two directions, and he cannot do a simple act of sweating the flies. So he can't do that also. So it is because he has become a unique creature. He's become something which is, very strange. So it is also a reflection of the Bengali aristocracy, who were affluent, but, not satisfied, not happy. They did not know what they actually reflected. Again, in another poem, if you look at the poem Ki Mushkil, again, this is a poem which is very interesting, where the particular person is actually looking into the encyclopedia and trying to find out how he can run away from a bull which is chasing him. The encyclopedia that he has tells him about everything, about medicines, about pujas, about toothpaste, about soap, everything, excepting this. So it is a reflection of those people, who go by the book, who are not independent thinkers, whose sense of reasoning and sense of obedience, as one would say, does not have that individual streak or ability. So this is what the Britishers wanted, a kind of a slanting, class of people to grow out of this education, who will not be able to, critique the regime which is actually subjugating them. So Ray's critiquing of this Babu, is a part of that, I would say, a tradition, which would include even a Ram Mohan, which would include Bonkim, which would include Tagore, and all of them. The poem Khichuri, is also an indicator. I was talking about this identity crisis, the crisis of the lack of individuality. In Khichuri also, the animal would want, one quality of different animals, which was, indicative of that. So the lion's mane, and the cuckoo's voice, everything that is best about an animal. And when ultimately, his wish is fulfilled, so this uniqueness, comes, to nothingness. So it doesn't do anything, and doesn't mean anything. So the poem, Khichuri, begins the Abul Tabul series in that way. Another thing, I think, the stereotypical distinctions, sharp distinctions that, even Abul Tabul talks about. Since I'm talking about the Babu culture, and I'm talking about this growth of this typical Babu, the typical mixture of the West and somewhat of the land. So the kind of masculinity, the masculine qualities like sporting, like hunting, the chivalric approach, these were not being talked about. So the Bengali Babu was being looked upon as somebody as effeminate, somebody who was bookish, over serious, somebody who could not even laugh. The Ram Guru Chana, it's afraid that if I laugh, it means just I am not going to look intelligent. So this is the kind of time, so the kind of a wry-ness that would come. Now, this observation is perhaps not exclusive. I am trying to thrust on that word, that Abul Tabul is more a social contemporary work, and there was a reason why it was being written. So the presentation is just not from the observant eye of Shukumar Ray, and he finds it out exclusively. The observation is also, he sees that yes, other people have also observed it. So that is also something that I believe, comes into Shukumar Ray's consideration when he writes his poem. In this regard, a slight diversion, but I don't think that much of a diversion. I would talk about, the editor's introduction that was written to Mrinalini Sinha's book, Colonial Masculinity, the Manly Englishman and the Effeminate Bengali in the late 19th century. This was written by John M. Mackenzie. Now, Mackenzie, and in that way, in the introduction, talks about an episode in the 1920s and says there was a station master on the Bengal-Assam Railway who had changed his name from Satish Chandra Mukherjee to Sidney Kenneth Mackenzie in order to join the volunteer force and secure rifle so that he could hunt the tigers which infested the area. So his desire to hunt is not my, lookout, but that he was practically the Bengali was trying to impersonate the Sahib, and believes that, without impersonification, which include changing names, sometimes even, changing religion, otherwise it was not possible to come to that kind of acceptance from the British Raj. So in fact, the colonial cliché of the effeminate Bengali Babu, that is there so much within the semblance of the political, economic, and administrative imperatives. Gayatri Spivak, when she wrote her essay, Can the Subaltern Speak?, asserts that, that is exactly what the Britishers wanted. Domesticate the Bengalis. Make them, household, and make, just not household, restrict them in terms of, bravado, in terms of experimenting, in terms of going out. So this endeavor to domesticate, I think, gets once again satirized in a poem like Bapuram Shapure. So the Bapuram, of course, it seems to be dashing and wants to, have 2 or 3 harmless snakes, which he can just, show his strength and courage over. So that would please the narrator, who we can say is the, representative of that British narratorial voice. That is one. On the other hand, I'm also talking about a camouflage. This was also the time when non-violence as a movement was taking up under Gandhi. And of course, non-violence, which was not about, a physical rigor, also had its own, I would say, critiquing. I'm not saying that, Shukumar Ray was against non-violence, but he was talking about, responses of some quarters, which could, of course, which included the Britishers also, that, these are people who cannot come and, ruffle up and fight up in that way. So these kind of things. On the other hand, maybe, talking about it in a camouflaged manner had other reasons. If you look at, Ray's poem, Ekushe Ain, which was written in 1922, this talks about the bizarre laws. Okay, and these bizarre laws are, of course, not meant for children. It is to make the adults, recall the torrent new laws that was affecting their daily life, that was being put up by the British regime. And this is, being done in a nonsensical verse. Exactly, around that time, Nojrul's journal, Jugobani and Dhumketu, where again he was talking about dissent, he was, he was talking against the British Empire. It resulted in Nojrul being jailed. So, the message, is something that, Shukumar Ray thought could be conveyed in this way. A probability. I'm not suggesting that this is something which is happening. Since repeatedly, I think the world of fantasy, captures our eyes, in the nonsense verses of Ray, when we talk about Abul Tabul, we are, of course, reminded of the tales of Alice. You would see that there is a certain amount of legitimacy in fantasy. Even if I'm talking about Edward Lear's The History of the Seven Families of the Lake Pipili Popple, fantasy is important. Lear I talk about for another reason, that he began his career in the pre-photography era and was an illustrator of natural history. And therefore, this illustration, exaggeration of characters through, through pictures, through paintings, was also a way to reach out to people, to actually make them, think, make certain kind of an identification, which is, of course, I think, an important aspect. So, the fantasy world, because it has a legitimacy, what does the nonsense do? It causes an inversion. It says, I'm going to turn everything upside down. And in turning upside down, it's like a mirror reflection. So, it's a mirror reflection, becomes a kind of a more real than it becomes a real in the fantasy world. So, therefore, in the fantasy world, when I'm talking about something, it is perhaps, more recognizable that, yes, I'm talking about this, this is, this kind of a political episode, or this is being criticized, something of that sort, will be a kind of an easy, I would say, identification. This is something probably that does not happen in the nonsense verse, and I think the contemporary time had to do with it, because the laws of censors would of course be one of the concerns, and whatever you wrote, and if it was recognized that this was not being written in favor of the British government, this could also mean trouble. Now, when I'm talking about the contemporary world, a poem like, let's say, সৎপাত্র, শুনতে গেলাম পোস্ত গিয়ে তোমার নাকি মেয়ের বিয়ে, গঙ্গারামকে পাত্র পেলে, জানতে চাও সে কেমন ছেলে. Now this is, the crisis of the marriage market, and it brings in the aspect of gender, I believe, like nothing else, that somehow the girl has to be married off, even if somebody who has failed matric for 19 times and belongs to a family which is kongsher bongsho, stuff like that, it is fine. And the attempt to break the marriage, posto, it would be, if you just move back slightly into this maze of history, you would realize that Posto was actually a kind of a port town, and there would be a kind of a very buzzing market. So you can imagine that in the buzzing market, there is this narrator who meets this, what you call, maybe the person's, relative, or some kind of a person to which Gangaram is, to be related, and therefore this attempt to, break this marriage. The girl's father would, definitely break the marriage on hearing this kind of responses. And of course, there is another person waiting. So these, keep on reverberating. And of course, the kind of, the desire to gossip, and all these things, the topsy-turvy world of the kings that are also there in number of poems of Abul Tabul talks about, the issue of kingship, that who should be the ruler. The ruler who is luxurious, exuberant, and who's somebody who doesn't think about the people. Questions the rationale of kingship as far as Indian tradition is concerned. So therefore, the British regime, with all its desire to just take, stuff from India, and of course, not think about the welfare of the people. So the king's indulgent attitude, and somebody who's not at all bothered about what is going to happen to the people is repeatedly being brought about. In another poem, if you look at Kumro Potash, again, the same thing is happening. Katukutu Buro, you would feel that, again, through poems like Ramguru Chana, Panto Bhuter Janto Chana, Kanto Buro, all these characters, build up what? The possible gaps, the gaps between the possible and the impossible. They sort of, force us that, I should look at the reality beyond the curtains of laughter. So all these characters just make you laugh. You roll over with laughter, and they sort of then take you through a voyage that, there is something beyond. So this entire social system, being dominated by a sense of hypocrisy, is something which is also being taken up through characters like Katukutu Buro and others, the tickling Buro who wouldn't laugh, okay, until he's tickled. So Kuror Khol, once again, this is talking about how hunger drives the society, but this is something that people will not talk about. Repeated hypocrisy of the society, repeated hypocrisies of people are definitely being brought out. King Booth, again, the odd one, is talking about the imperfection in everybody. So the attempt of the Babu, or the Babu believing that I am perfect, it is also being nullified in this way. So in this poem, this is a festival. I think this just breaks rules, even in terms of, I think, illustrations. So you are asked to read the poems, just not in that individual frame of the poem, but through illustrations also. They help it. So the children enjoy this kind of a fantasy, this illustrations, which encourage them to think. And for the adult, it is a kind of a kind of a smile, I would say, if not a laughter always, in the mind when you realize that, oh God, so many familiar things around me has been put up in this nonsensical world. This is a world which is imprisoned because it is inversed. But then you realize this inversion has actually imprisoned rationality. We, on the other hand, have become the irrational, or we are not the people who are being rational. So from Tash Guru to Hash Jharu, all these things, talk about a journey of sense, of reality, of a fantasy, and just they keep on, taking us between this world of reality, non-reality, fantasy, non-fantasy, and this goes on. And finally, I think a question remains, that why did he target children? Was Abul Tabul only written for children? I think a part of it, I think I have answered, because it is also about a process of character building. A lot of children's literature, was written on this illusionary and, fantasy format. And it was thought that it filled up the minds of the children with things that probably they could do without, or did not do them any good. So nonsensical verse was also an attempt, for exploration, look beyond. So that was there. On the other hand, it kept a facade that, okay, this was children's literature, nothing dangerous being written. So everything is like fine. This is an inversion world, and there. But you could probably write about many political, many social issues, as I was talking. So it provides you with a kind of an alternative definition of logic. That logic, which seems to be the life, but this illogicality of life being presented in the nonsense verse itself becomes a definition of logic. And this I think this movement away from reality, and presenting us and taking us to that childhood world where I see animals can fly, where animals can talk. These are very lightening up of things, and when that happens, it perhaps opens up the very contours of mind to a lot of things. And Ray perhaps was doing that very brilliantly. He was talking about the political issues. He was talking about social, I would say, hypocrisies, attitudes, and he was awakening the mind like anything. And with that illustration, I think a new form of process of thinking, to be using pictures along with the process of writing. I think this itself was uh, I believe one of those forward-thinking things. Perhaps a little stretching of it. Later, when comics and other things would come, I am always reminded of Shukumar Ray, and because using illustration pictures to actually tell, communicate, is also an important aspect of Abul Tabul. And finally, to say that to the adult mind, it is comfort from the morbidity of the real world. For the children, it is just fun to enter and realize, okay, these are the things that probably nobody wants to be a Ram Guru Chana, nobody wants to be a Katukutuburu, or like in Gof Churi, which is again a kind of a very direct hit on the idea of Babu, who just makes a lot of noise and shout and says that my mustache has been stolen. I will punish those people if my mustache is not gone. So it is just that representation of the hierarchy, and also through many denotations where in the Bengali literature in that time, where perhaps chauvinism and these kind of things were getting represented through uh, geographical spaces apart from Bengal, which could be Maharashtra, which could be other places. This was also a kind of important indicators, asking us to think, rethink our position. So it is also, something which is asking us to, to sort of, hold on to our identity. Because like in Khichuri, where identity seems to be, gone for a toss, you don't know what you are. These are the questions that at the end of the day, Abul Tabul as a text, Abul Tabul, I wouldn't say as a text, as a group of poems is actually doing. So therefore, there lies, I believe, the sense in this nonsensical world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am, so much for your insightful presentation. So, yes, it is really a recollection of our childhood fantasies through the writings and poems of Shukumar Rai. And also, these kind of poems taught us how to imagine fantastical things which are beyond reality, or which does not have any connection to the reality. Now we shall go on with the question answer section, and I see that there is a question given by Ishani Ghosh. She asks, is Abul Tabul, apart from being a political satire, is a mockery of what Salman Rushdie calls chutnification of the East and the West?
Well, yes, that would be, the very word chutnification, as when Salman Rushdie was using, I think had a different connotations, in that way. Of course, on one hand, it was talking about the cultural mixing up. And on the other hand, it was also talking about, the politics of the language in that way within English. So I think, in a way, temperamentally, when Rushdie was trying to talk about technification, it had its different implications. But Abul Tabul, in a way, is a more direct political satire. Salman Rushdie is talking about, more about cultural, disruptions. He's talking more about, cultural hegemony, which because of layers of influences, have come to a different level altogether. So that is, Rushdie's take. Whereas, from the point, the time when Shukumar Ray was writing, it was more about a consential comment on the political personification, political responses of that time. So not exactly the same thing. I don't think so.
So now I think we have got another question which is asked by Farha Yasmin, who are actually be termed as subaltern, keeping in mind both of Gayatri's subaltern and subaltern from the view of British Raj in India.
Subaltern and Gayatri Spivaks is the people who have not been able to tell their story, not been able to tell their history, have been marginalized in that way in terms of voices, in literature, in history. Whereas when we talk about the subaltern from the British Raj, it was anybody that they were ruling over, so it was this imperial, superiority, and therefore, the colonized was of course the subaltern. So it was a class, it was, people of certain country. Whereas the subaltern, as Gayatri Spivak is, yes, of course, it has its Indian resonances, but it can be, it definitely can include people whose voices have not been heard. It could be of any gender, it could be of any social space, it could be space within culture. Anything could happen. So that is what the difference is.
Are there any more questions, or anyone else would like to ask any other
I
questions?
don't
Or
think there is any other question. Mm, at least it's not showing here. No, Shantanu, I don't think there is any other question.
so, since there are no more questions, I guess let me pass on to our Tathagata sir to carry on the webinar. Sir, could you please join?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Anthony, for conducting that question answer session. And of course, thanks, Mohammed, for being really so lucidly you have explained this, you have done this analysis with so many, the number of poems in Abul Tabul and the concept of this Babu, which was there, very much there. So thank you. And just a few, two announcements I would like to make here for the participants. The feedback form will be available to you in the WhatsApp group. It will be posted there shortly, and it will be there for about 30 minutes, and you can respond there. And regarding your certificates, of course, we'll try to send you your certificates through email. In about 20 days time, I think 15 to 20 days, so please bear with us. Since there is no other question, I think since I cannot see any other question, so it is time to call it a day. I think it's been almost 2 hours now, and it's been a wonderful session. So before before we formally end, of course, the vote of thanks. The vote of thanks needs to be offered, and I would first of all, of course, thank our respected principal sir, Dr. Veer Vikram Roy, for being so encouraging about this webinar, and he has always been very enthusiastic about all our efforts, whatever we have been doing. And I recall that when I first told him about this webinar, that we were arranging this webinar on popular literature, he was really enthusiastic about it, and he said that he was always with us. So thank you, sir. We always look forward to your advice and guidance. Next, of course, our three distinguished speakers, Professor Abhilash De, Professor Debanjana Naik, and Professor Dr. Madhumita Majumdar. Thank you all for your enlightening discussions. And I think that this webinar was actually, we were aiming to provide our third semester students some kind of a exposure to popular literature, because it's kind of a new concept really. So I think it has been quite beneficial for them. And we also we have been as teachers, because we have to teach these texts, and we have been really refreshed, and I think that was really wonderful for all of you. So it was really, we are honored to have you. We had you this evening. It was wonderful having you. And Regarding the participants, of course, there was a lot of participation, active participation from the participants, and I thank you all for registering yourselves and the other people who might have viewed this through YouTube live streaming. And my colleagues, of course, they also deserve thanks for having registered. So thank you. Our students who have been, of course, they have been waiting patiently because we could not start on time because of some technical issues. But thank you for joining in. And I think, as I mentioned, it was really a wonderful session for all of us. And I think that you have really enjoyed this webinar, and it would be of help to you when you do attend the classes. And last but not the least, of course, I need to thank my colleagues, my three colleagues in the department, Professor Jagabandhu Sarkar, Professor Devdutt Mukherjee, and Professor Anthony Day. They have been always by my side, and they have extended all possible help to me at every step. So without your active support, this webinar would not have happened. So thank you and bye for now, everyone. Good night. So may you stay happy and healthy. Good night and thank you. So let me end this broadcast. Thank you all.